Nobody despises casual relationships, and nobody thinks about the consequences. I always thought that I wouldn't have to experience such things and stopped any such advances towards me. But one time I couldn't resist. Back then, I wasn't yet a husband and a father. I was just a guy who was dating a girl and courting her. I was 23, and she was 20. My Julia was still studying. I had already finished trade school. I didn't want to pursue higher education, but I insisted that Julia should. Our relationship was wonderful, except for one thing that bothered me. I realized that I had caught a rare flowery virgin. But a year of meek kisses and hugs was driving me crazy. I understood that my girlfriend was very well raised, and it was nice to know that I would be the only one, and God willing, for our entire happy life. Truth be told, as it often happens, the body demands its due, but I held on because I loved and still love. It was time to meet each other's families. Julia had met mine, and they liked her, hinting it was time to propose marriage, and who could object? It was just a matter of meeting her family next. All I knew about them was that her father was in the military, and her mother had run off with a lover, leaving a 5-year-old daughter with her young father. He had been alone for a long time, living for his daughter, but then he fell in love, like a schoolboy. And it wasn't the usual older man with a younger woman. No, they were almost the same age, career and all. I was a bit nervous, as I had heard how such fathers protect their little girl like a dragon over its treasure. We agreed to meet at their country house where the air was fresh and nobody canceled the barbecue. The meeting went surprisingly well, but the main bonus for her father was that I was serious, and his daughter remained untouched until the marriage. So, I was the victor on all fronts. Julia's stepmother, Veronica, was indeed an attractive and strict woman, but she treated her stepdaughter well. She had no children of her own. She asked me many questions, some of them quite personal, about how such a young man could endure a year, to which I honestly replied that I would rather endure now and be happy later. She smiled. We heated the sauna, Julia's father went to rest, and I stayed to sit with my fiancée and her stepmother. Veronica, as she asked to be called, or Ronnie, joked around. Julia modestly snuggled up to me. We all drank more wine with meat, and it was time to go to sleep, and since I was a gentleman, and honestly, I could no longer just hug my girlfriend without consequences, we slept in separate rooms, which the cottage allowed. I was surprised that the future father-in-law and mother-in-law also slept in separate rooms, but I didn't ask, it wasn't my business. Julia wished me a good night, kissed me on the cheek, and went to sleep, while I decided to sit outside a bit longer and drink. The evening almost turned into night. Everyone seemed to have dispersed, and I couldn't sleep. I just wanted some quiet and fresh air. Can't sleep? Ronnie asked me. No, I just want to sit for a bit. I politely smiled at her. May I sit here too? It's been a tough week, she sighed heavily, and I involuntarily noticed her revealing neckline. Yes, of course. I nodded. The woman walked past me, and I almost closed my eyes from such a sight. It was simply a blow to my patience. Her long black silk robe was wide open. Underneath was a semi-transparent negligee that nearly revealed everything, and her long legs were encased in such soft slippers that it added a certain charm to the overall picture. I sighed heavily. I am a loyal man, but reflexes are just that, reflexes. When are you planning to get married? Asked Ronnie, leaning over to pour herself some wine. There was really no need to lean that much. It seemed intentional, but I managed to look away in time. The woman seemed to smirk, or maybe it was just my imagination. Soon, I said, downing my glass. My thoughts were absolutely indecent. Ronnie was indeed a stunning woman. You feel like a wild Tarzan next to such women, so I understood what her father found in her. She casually crossed her legs, and the long robe slid off her leg, revealing a very epic view. To say that I was tense is an understatement. It felt like an electric wave ran through me and hit me. Deciding that I couldn't endure such torment, I quickly apologized and said that I would wash up and also rest. She silently smiled. In the sauna, I spent about 20 minutes dousing myself with cold water to erase this obsession and peacefully go to sleep, and I thought that Ronnie would have left by then. I stepped out and froze. My future mother-in-law was sitting in the pre-bath area, in just a transparent negligee, and without her robe. Excuse me. I covered a strategic place and reached for a towel. She clearly didn't intend to respond, So I apologized again and began gathering my clothes to simply leave as quickly as possible. Ronnie's behavior was strange. It seemed she deliberately tormented me with such a sight. Maybe they were testing my fidelity, I thought, but didn't comment. While I frantically gathered my things in confusion, Ronnie approached me and grabbed my hand. I shuddered and dropped some items. The woman looked at me with a mischievous smile. I wanted to say something, but all words just disappeared. She didn't hesitate, didn't chatter, didn't say anything, just pulled me to her and kissed me. Yes, I did nothing, just nothing. I allowed her to kiss me, and when I realized that my hands were already eagerly caressing her body, I jumped back. I, deeply apologize. I muttered something incoherent and unclear, and like the last coward, I ran away. In the room, I quickly dressed, locked the door, just in case, and crawled under the duvet. Strange as it was, I didn't feel like a betrayer at that moment. I had invented a whole mountain of excuses for myself, but I felt uneasy knowing that she was my father-in-law's wife, even if not Julia's biological mother, but still considered a parent, and they had quite a warm relationship. There were plenty of thoughts. Maybe they really had problems in their intimate life, or maybe it was indeed a test. I agonized for a long time. Then, without realizing it, I fell asleep, and all night I dreamed of my future mother-in-law. Her plump lips, her decent chest, long legs, and such revealing attire. How my imagination exploded in my dreams. Even my conscience tormented me in the morning. Descending to breakfast, I was shaking like an aspen leaf, realizing that there would be consequences, and probably not small ones. But nobody said anything, as if nothing had happened the previous day, and only Ronnie, each time she looked at me, slightly bit her lip, smiled, and licked her lips. I was very nervous. Every time I looked at her, I remembered the evening image, so I made an excuse about urgent business and left as soon as possible. The following days, I was like on a powder keg, flinching at calls from my beloved and fearing a scandal. My conscience began to dig a hole in me with a spoon. I needed to tell her, but how? And what if I only made things worse? But nothing happened. I gradually calmed down. We filed an application at the courthouse with Julia, preparing for married life. Yet I began to notice that I increasingly dreamed of Ronnie. Julia is beautiful, sweet, but not one of those fiery beauties who will blaze with passion. I comforted myself with the thought that as I teach her, so it will be between us, but I kept thinking about what a woman like Ronnie is capable of. Did I berate myself for such thoughts? Yes, and more than once. Avoided meeting her parents, or only visited when the mother-in-law was not at home. It was shameful to look the father-in-law in the eyes. He loved this woman and his daughter too, and he treated me well, but here I was thinking about both his daughter and his wife. Thus, the last month before the wedding flew by, and my bachelor party arrived. My sweet Julia and her friends organized a pajama party at her father's cottage. I was there with the guys too, so my bride knew exactly that my bachelor party went without cheating. First, we all sat together, and then, as they say, boys to the left, girls to the right. Julia's friends, like the bride herself, drank quite a bit. Fortunately, the wedding was not the next morning. Everyone decided it was better that way. Her father was on a business trip, but my future mother-in-law sat with the girls, and this reassured me. There were many people, so everything was normal. When Ronnie came down to us and said that all the ladies were asleep, we laughed, saying their party fell asleep, like the brave. The guys also quietly went to sleep, not to get too drunk, but I decided to have fun, as did my friend Ryan. Ronnie decided to join us, saying it was the first time her daughter was getting married, and we didn't object. The conversation soon turned to risque jokes. Ryan clearly had his eyes on my mother-in-law, but I warned him about her husband. He nodded understandingly. We played cards for desires, drank Bruderschaft, and told risque jokes, and it seems Ryan forgot my warnings. I went to get another bottle, checked on Julia. She was so tender, tiny, sweet, her light pajama reminding me of a cloud, and naturally, I got excited, but to avoid approaching the drunk bride and breaking my word, I went back to drinking. What I saw next completely shocked me. Ronnie was sitting on top of Ryan, and they were passionately kissing. At first, I was angry, I don't know at whom, but I continued to watch. Ryan brazenly groped my future mother-in-law, and she wriggled on him like a snake. They didn't notice me immediately, but I don't think I even embarrassed them. Ronnie winked at me and continued to pull my friend's shirt off. Ryan was clearly not opposed. Rather, he was already uncovering the woman's shoulders, kissing them. The passion she exuded was something else. I never thought it was possible to act like this. I don't know why and what was in my head, besides wild desire, but I approached them, grabbed Ronnie's long hair in my fist, pulled her away from Ryan and kissed her myself. My friend wasn't bothered. He just laughed and continued to caress her body with his kisses. While I kissed her, he had already exposed her breasts, a solid size, standing firm, and he caressed them with his hands and covered them with kisses. Ronnie moaned. I ran my hands over her chest and hated myself. It was wrong. How did I manage to stop? I don't know. I just abruptly walked away from her. She smiled and pressed against my friend. Ryan laughed and continued his caresses, not wanting to see all this. I decided to leave, so as not to be guilty. Although I already felt guilty and knew that neither Julia nor her father would forgive me, I would not forgive myself either. Due to the alcohol, I quickly passed out, but in the morning, when I realized what had happened, I nearly went crazy. How would I now look them in the eyes, knowing that they obviously had an epic continuation last night? With a sick head, I went downstairs. I reached the kitchen and immediately froze. There sat the father-in-law, drinking coffee and chatting sweetly with his wife. "Oh, son-in-law, well done. I see everything is intact," he laughed. "Exactly," I replied, cursing myself in every possible way. We had a nice chat. Then the others began to gather. The father-in-law laughed heartily when he saw how the inexperienced youth used pickle juice and water to remedy their hangovers, grabbing whatever liquid they could from each other. Julia came down last of all, with such a sweet expression of suffering. I felt sorry for her and gave her a tablet to ease her hangover. Ryan behaved calmly, but kept looking at Ronnie, and it seemed he was not embarrassed by anything. By the evening, everyone started to head home. I and Ryan drove Julia, and I took my friend to his place. "Ryan, aren't you bothered?" I finally asked. "No," he calmly replied. "And yesterday, you and Ronnie," I reminded him. "Well, you remember yourself too, although it's a pity you left, hot woman. I'd even say too much. I erased everything," he boasted. I blame myself very much. Just a year and a half of abstinence. And then this, yes, on a drunken head. I began to justify myself, but Ryan interrupted me. "Stop. You wouldn't be so tense and stop boring me with that look." He raised his hands as if surrendering. "She's a hungry woman. They apparently have problems with that. One man is not enough for her, and she doesn't like monotony. Plus, your father-in-law is old-fashioned and thinks apparently that's enough for her," he said so calmly. "And if he finds out?" I smirked. "And?" He looked at me. "You think I'm the only one on that list, my friend? I'll disappoint you. Such women just can't stand monotony. If you didn't take your chance, another will. She's a smart woman and knows how to make everything look good. And the figure there is fire. Not for me to tell you," he smirked. I was silent. We didn't bring up that topic again. And why bother? Better not to interfere. Let them figure it out themselves. We played the wedding, and my first wedding night happened. Julia was so sweet and gentle. I felt like a hero, honestly. Everything went just beautifully, and we were both satisfied, despite all our fears about the first time. Life went on as usual, at least I thought so. We gathered again at their country house. My parents were there too. Everyone was relaxing, joking, and laughing. Besides me and Julia, my older brother came with his pregnant wife. They were expecting a boy soon. Honestly, I didn't even think that something could happen, as my brother loved his wife too much. But history repeated itself. Only this time nobody was extremely drunk, and it didn't escape my mother's notice. I sat drinking beer, grilling meat, waiting while my brother swam in the pond, not thinking about anything particular, although I ignored my mother-in-law's glances and hugged my wife tighter. "What the hell? Ronnie? Matt?" It was my mother's voice. She was clearly angry and shocked. I rushed over. It was like a scene from a painting, Matt quickly getting dressed and Ronnie, my mother, hands on hips and the look of a harpy, accompanied by curses. I was scared. My mother would tell everything. My brother would divorce. My father-in-law too. Julia would find out. It would be a disaster. I had to calm my mother. Matt was on his knees begging and saying he didn't understand how it happened. My mother cried, and Ronnie just sat down next to her and simply said, "Oh, don't make a tragedy out of it. Your son isn't a little child. I'll get a divorce. But what's it to me? And your future grandson without a father, a betrayer." She smiled calmly and went into the house. We probably sat in shock for about 30 minutes. But on the other hand, the woman was right. She would suffer the least. And what a shame for me before my father-in-law because of my brother. That would be a complete downfall of everything. My mother apparently thought so too. She didn't speak properly with my brother for half a year. No one said anything to anyone except my father. My mother couldn't keep it in, to which he simply and calmly replied to her, "What did you expect from our son?" He then looked at my mother, who was shouting at home at Matt. "Here's a hot woman. She takes care of herself so much that both our daughters-in-law are just blah. Guys are hot, and around them are logs." And he left the family gathering. My mother then started to doubt his fidelity too, but he said, "Thank God everything was fine with them." I thought about my father's words about Julia, and they also told me, "As you raise her, so it will be." But then I remembered how she refused any such experiments, and even sex in a car in the woods for her was almost a sin. I didn't touch my mother-in-law, but a year into married life, I started to avoid sex with my wife. Too correct and too boring. No variety. She was shy and basically thought it wrong. For her, our bed was almost like an altar, where she just lay and sometimes moaned. I understand that it's all wrong, but I understood my father's words about the logs. That's exactly the kind of fire that's missing, and my own wife isn't even ready to try. I don't justify Ronnie, although maybe my father-in-law is too old-fashioned, or maybe it's his age, but I genuinely feel sorry for him. Maybe that's why most people cheat, or am I just a scumbag, like everyone else?